There are few things more hopeful or more dangerous than a hotel trying to look rich in bad weather. At Tommel Castle the carpets had been beaten, the silver rubbed, the roses arranged to hide the cracks in the plaster, and the scones baked with a determination almost equal to prayer. Guests had come north for romance, or for the appearance of it. There would be high tea, staged proposals, photographs beside the old staircase, and enough tartan ribbon to tie up a small boat. But in the Highlands, polish has a way of showing fingerprints. Tonight, we come to a weekend where love is being sold with scones, silver, and smiles, and where one small flaw in a pair of sugar tongs begins, quietly, to tell the truth. Chapter 1. High Tea for Lovers. The trouble began with Mrs. Wellington's complaint about the roses. "They are not romantic," she said, standing in the middle of Patel's shop, with a bunch of them held at arm's length, as if they had personally disappointed her. "They are tired." Mr. Patel, who had ordered the roses through a cousin's cousin in Inverness, and had been regretting it since dawn, said, "They have travelled a long way." "So did bonny Prince Charlie," said Mrs. Wellington. "And look how that ended." Hamish Macbeth, who had only come in for tea, bacon, and a packet of biscuits he intended not to mention to Lugs, paused by the door. Outside, rain thickened the air over Lochdew, blurring the harbour, the hills, and the few determined gulls hunched along the pier. It was the sort of wet Highland afternoon that made every colour look honest and every human scheme look foolish. "What's wrong with the roses?" he asked. Mrs. Wellington turned on him with relief. A policeman was useful when a grievance needed official shape. "They're for Tommel Castle," she said, "for this romance nonsense. A Highland Romance Weekend, if you please. As if romance was something you could arrange between tea and dinner with a printed programme." Mr. Patel gave Hamish a look, asking him not to encourage her. "I'm sure folk have arranged worse between tea and dinner," said Hamish mildly. Mrs. Wellington sniffed. "You would say that. You've never had a proper romantic nature. That'll be why I'm still alive." Mr. Patel coughed into his hand. Hamish took his tea, bacon, and biscuits, then left before Mrs. Wellington could draft him into delivering floral judgment to the hotel. But the village had already been claimed by the event. A notice in the shop window promised "Highland Romance Weekend at Tommel Castle Hotel" in letters edged with gold. Beneath it, smaller lines offered high tea, a mock wedding reception, private consultations with Serena Lyle, society matchmaker and columnist, and a prize for the most romantic proposal. Someone had drawn a small skull beside the word proposal. Hamish suspected a schoolboy, though there were adults in Lochdew with similar artistic restraint. By 2 o'clock, Tommel Castle Hotel was trying very hard to be grand. The drawing-room had been polished until the tables shone, and the old portraits looked suspiciously awake. Tartan runners lay across white cloths. Tiered stands carried finger sandwiches, shortbread, cream cakes, and petit fours, iced in pale pink and green. Bowls of roses stood near the fire, drooping slightly in the heat. Rain tapped the tall windows and turned the hills beyond into a grey wash. Mr. Johnson, the hotel manager, moved about the room with the bright, strained smile of a man whose accounts were standing behind him with knives. "Careful with that stand, Callum. No, not there. Lady Gilchrist will not want to reach across the fire-irons for a sandwich, Miss Halberton Smythe. Thank heavens. Could you?" "I already have," said Priscilla Halberton Smythe. She was by the mantelpiece, calm, elegant, and perfectly aware of every small disaster before it became visible. She had shifted 2 chairs to stop a draught, removed a chipped plate from the best table, and persuaded a nervous bride-to-be that rain on a wedding weekend was a sign of fertility rather than plumbing failure. Hamish, arriving in uniform because Blair had telephoned that morning to say any disturbance at Tommel Castle would prove he could not manage his own patch, saw Priscilla before she saw him. That gave him nearly 3 seconds to prepare himself. It was not enough. "Hamish," she said, "you've been sent to guard the romance." "Aye. There's no telling what damage it might do if left loose." Her mouth curved. Try not to arrest anyone before the mock reception. Mr. Johnson has sold tickets. I'll do my best. Behind him, Luggs pushed his way in with the confident air of a dog who understood that hotels were full of dropped food and weak discipline. He found the table nearest the fire, inspected the territory beneath it, and settled with his nose pointed toward the shortbread. "Your dog is attending?" asked Priscilla. "He has a professional interest in catering." Before she could answer, the room shifted. It was not silence exactly. It was the small pause a room makes when someone enters who expects to be noticed. Serena Lyle stood in the doorway in a cream coat too clean for the weather. She was tall, beautifully dressed, and smiled as if every person present had been placed there for her amusement and possible use. Her fair hair was swept up beneath a soft hat, and her gloves were the colour of expensive paper. Mr. Johnson hurried forward. "Miss Lyle, delighted, truly delighted. Tommel Castle is honoured. Mr. Johnson," she said, giving him her hand. "How charming! It looks almost ancestral." Hamish saw Priscilla's eyebrow move by a fraction. Serena crossed the room slowly, making introductions into little performances. To a widowed gentleman with polished shoes and too much aftershave, she gave warmth. To a young couple sitting rigidly side by side, she gave sparkle. To Callum Firth, the waiter, she gave a glance that made him straighten his shoulders and nearly drop the milk jug. "And you must be the local policeman," she said when she reached Hamish. "I must be." "How reassuring." "That depends on what you're planning." She laughed. It was a good laugh, low and flattering, but it arrived a little before the joke deserved it. "Oh, I never plan anything wicked before tea." "Very orderly of you." Her eyes rested on him a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned to the tea table. "What a pretty service." Mr. Johnson brightened. 18th century. "Well, parts of it. It belongs to the hotel collection." "Does it indeed?" She lifted the silver sugar tongs from beside the bowl. They were delicate, engraved with a worn crest, and slightly sprung at the hinge. One claw bent inward, not enough to spoil its use, but enough to give the thing a look of private injury. "How sweet," Serena said. "This little claw has been in the wars." Mr. Johnson's smile twitched. "Antique pieces have character. They also have insurance values," she said lightly. For half a second, nobody moved. Then she used the tongs to pick up a sugar cube and drop it into her tea. The bent claw brushed a petit four on the edge of the plate. Hamish, who had been watching her hands rather than her smile, noticed the neat crescent dent left in the soft icing. A tiny thing. Almost nothing. Serena noticed him noticing. "Policemen do love marks," she said. "Only the ones that keep repeating themselves." "Then I shall try not to become a pattern." She moved away to charm Lady Gilchrist, leaving behind the scent of rain-damp wool, perfume, and trouble. Hamish accepted a cup of tea from Priscilla. "You don't like her," she said. "I haven't made up my mind." "That usually means you have." Across the room, Serena had made the widowed gentleman laugh too loudly. Callum Firth was watching her as if she had opened a door in the wall. "Mr. Johnson had gone to the sideboard and was rearranging spoons that needed no rearranging. Outside, rain ran down the windows in wavering lines, turning the lawns silver grey. Inside, the fire was warm, the china was fine, the cakes were sweet, and everyone smiled a little too carefully. Under the table, Luggs caught a falling crumb before it reached the carpet. Hamish looked at the crescent mark in the icing, then at Serena Lyle's bright cream figure moving through the room. Tommel Castle, he thought, was selling romance with both hands. And someone in the room already looked afraid of the bill. Chapter 2. The Matchmaker's Smile. By late afternoon, the hotel conservatory had begun to steam. Rain pressed against the glass roof and trickled down in narrow, shining lanes. Inside, the air smelled of damp fern, florist's tape, and expensive anxiety. Sample bouquets stood in silver buckets along one wall. Seating charts were spread over a table beside menus printed on thick cream card, where the prices were written in a discreet typeface, as if embarrassment could be made smaller by good paper. Hamish stood by a potted palm that had seen better governments. He was trying not to look at Priscilla. Priscilla was correcting a seating plan with a pencil and a patience that made lesser people ashamed of their handwriting. She wore a pale blue dress that suited the room better than the room suited itself. "Every few minutes, mister." Johnson rushed in, asked her a question, failed to wait for the answer, and rushed out again. Serena Lyle, meanwhile, moved through the conservatory like a woman conducting auditions. "Oh, my dear," she said to a bride-to-be from Edinburgh, "a winter wedding can be exquisite. The trick is to make cold look intentional." The bride glanced at the rain. "In Scotland, that may not be difficult." Serena laughed and touched her arm. "Exactly. You must use what the place gives you." Then she turned and saw Priscilla's seating chart. "Ah, strategy. Survival," said Priscilla. Serena came closer. "There is a difference in hotels. Not always." That pleased Serena. Her smile became more real, or at least more interested. "You are Miss Halberton Smythe?" "Yes." "Then you are the reason this place has not collapsed into tartan and panic. Only for the weekend." Serena looked through the glass at the grey lawns and the old hotel beyond. "It could be adorable, you know." Priscilla's pencil paused. "Tommel Castle? If it stopped pretending to be aristocratic," said Serena. "People forgive shabby charm. They do not forgive failed grandeur." Hamish watched Mr. Johnson, who had just re-entered carrying a folder. He had heard enough to know he should not have heard any of it. His smile held for a moment, then slipped. Serena saw the slip too. She accepted a glass of water from Callum Firth, the young waiter, without looking at him until the last second. Then she looked fully. Callum straightened, as if a photographer had shouted his name. "Thank you," she said. "You have excellent hands for service." Callum flushed. Mr. Johnson frowned. "Callum, the place cards?" "Yes, sir." Callum backed away, caught his hip on the corner of the sample menu table, and sent 3 cards fluttering to the floor. Hamish bent to pick one up. It read, "Silver Romance Package. Full deposit. Required on booking." There was another beneath it. "Heather Moonlight Package. Full deposit required on booking." The third was blank on one side. On the other, someone had written a name and a date, then crossed both out heavily. Hamish handed the cards to Callum. "Busy weekend," he said. "Aye," said Callum. Too quickly. "Grand for the hotel." "You sound as if you're trying to convince the wallpaper." Callum glanced toward Johnson. "I just carry trays. A dangerous profession in a room like this." That earned a brief grin. It vanished when Serena spoke behind them. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I should like to see your private booking ledger." The conservatory changed temperature. Not greatly. Not in a way a guest from Edinburgh would notice. But Hamish noticed. Priscilla noticed too, though she kept her eyes on the seating chart. Johnson hugged the folder to his chest. "The ledger?" "Yes. Not the brochure list. The actual bookings. Deposits, transfers, cancellations, that sort of thing." "My dear Miss Lyle, of course. Only it is not quite ready." Serena tilted her head. "Ledgers rarely need dressing for tea." Johnson's laugh came out, polished and thin. "We have had a great deal to organise." "I'm sure." Callum lifted a tray of empty glasses from the side table. At the word ledger, his fingers jerked. One glass tipped, struck another, and the tray went down with a musical crash that brought every conversation in the conservatory to a halt. "Callum!" snapped Johnson. It slipped. Clearly. The young waiter crouched, gathering glass with clumsy haste. A shard nicked his thumb. Blood appeared in a bright bead, small but accusing. Serena watched him. Then she smiled. "Poor boy. Romance always has casualties." Callum's face hardened. For a moment, he looked less vain than angry. Then he pressed a napkin to his thumb and muttered an apology. A voice from the doorway said, "Have I arrived too late for the casualties?" Elspeth Grant shook rain from her coat and stepped into the conservatory with a notebook in one hand and a look of alert amusement in her eyes. She was dark-haired, sharp-faced, and too observant for Hamish's peace of mind. "Elspeth," he said. "Hamish." Priscilla looked up from the seating chart. "Miss Grant," she said pleasantly, Are you covering the weekend? For the paper, said Elspeth. Rural romance, Highland atmosphere, possibly damp sandwiches. My editor is very excited. Your editor is easily pleased. My editor is in Inverness, and therefore safe from experience. Hamish felt, with some irritation, that both women had now seen him see the other. Elspeth's gaze moved from him to Priscilla and back again. Her smile did not widen, which made it worse. So, she said, are you here officially? I'm here to prevent romance becoming disorderly. That sounds like something you'd be good at avoiding. Before Hamish could answer, a burst of heavy footsteps came from the service passage. Blair appeared at the far end of the conservatory, coat collar turned up, cigarette unlit between his fingers, because even Blair seemed to understand that smoking among bouquets might be frowned upon by paying guests. Macbeth, he barked. Several brides turned. One elderly aunt looked delighted. This was better than cake tasting. Hamish walked over. Blair leaned close and lowered his voice only slightly. Any trouble? Not unless you count the menus. I don't like this place. Too many curtains, too many women with notebooks. There are 2. That's too many. Blair's eyes found Elspeth. Press? Ah, yeah. Keep your mouth shut, then. I was planning to breathe through my nose. Blair scowled. Don't get clever. The superintendent wants no embarrassment at Tommel Castle. Rich folk complain louder. They're not all rich, said Hamish. Then they should complain quieter. Blair lit the cigarette now that he was half in the service doorway, as if geography made vice respectable. He looked over Hamish's shoulder at the flowers, the charts, Serena, Priscilla, and the nervous young waiter with a napkin around his thumb. And what exactly are you doing? Guarding wedding cakes. Blair grunted. Well, see you don't eat the evidence. He left, trailing wet smoke and self-importance. Elspeth came to stand beside Hamish. He improves every room by leaving it, she said. That's his gift. Across the conservatory, Serena was speaking softly to Johnson. He was nodding too often. Priscilla had stopped pretending to correct the seating plan. Callum, pale now, carried the broken glass away. Hamish looked at the printed menus, the crossed-out booking card, and Johnson's folder held tight against his chest. Outside, rain blurred the glass until the conservatory seemed sealed off from the rest of the world. Inside, the roses waited in their buckets, already beginning to wilt. Chapter 3. A toast no one enjoyed. By evening, Tommel Castle had decided to become a palace. The ballroom, which in daylight showed cracks near the cornices and a damp stain above the French windows, had been transformed by candlelight into something almost convincing. White cloths covered the tables. More roses had been brought in, though several were already bowing their heads like guests regretting attendance. A string trio from Inverness played near the fireplace, with the anxious sincerity of musicians paid partly in exposure. At the far end of the room stood an arch of birch branches and silk ribbon, prepared for the mock proposal later in the programme. Hamish looked at it, and thought it had the air of a trap set for fools. He had taken up a position near the doors, close enough to watch the room and far enough from Blair's likely entrance. Priscilla moved among the tables, speaking to guests with a composure that made Mr. Johnson's fussy dignity look like a badly folded napkin. Elspeth sat near the wall with her notebook open, writing very little and noticing far too much. Serena Lyle had changed into dark green silk. It was a clever dress, rich without being loud, and it made every other woman in the room briefly aware of her own sleeves. She accepted admiration as if it were a normal part of the service. Callum Firth poured champagne with a white bandage on his thumb. He had arranged his face into professional emptiness, though his ears reddened whenever Serena came near. The widowed guest, Alastair Wren, hovered beside her with the tragic eagerness of a man who believed conversation could be courtship if he leaned forward enough. "My late wife adored the Highlands," Hamish heard him say. "How generous of her to leave them to you," said Serena. Alastair laughed too loudly. At the top table, Mr. Johnson stood to make his welcome speech. He tapped a glass. Nothing happened. He tapped harder. The string trio stopped halfway through something mournful. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "honoured guests, friends of Tommel Castle, lovers of romance." A spoon fell somewhere near the back. Johnson's smile held. "We are delighted to welcome you to our first Highland Romance Weekend. Tommel Castle has always been a place where tradition and beauty meet." Hamish saw Priscilla glance at the damp stain above the windows. "And tonight," Johnson continued, "we celebrate not only romance but trust. Trust between couples, trust between families, trust between an establishment and those who choose it for the happiest day of their lives." Serena looked down into her glass. Elspeth wrote something. Johnson introduced Serena with visible relief. "And now our honoured guest, whose column has guided many of the finest society weddings in Britain, Miss Serena Lyle." Serena rose. The room warmed toward her. That was her gift. Even people she had unsettled wanted her approval. She lifted her glass, waited until the last whisper died, then smiled. "Mr. Johnson is quite right," she said. "Romance is built on trust." There was a polite murmur. "And trust, like good silver, must be kept clean." Hamish's gaze shifted to Johnson. Serena continued. "A hotel like Tommel Castle sells more than rooms and menus. It sells a promise. A bride does not book a ballroom. She books the belief that one day will be held safely for her." A young bride-to-be near the front squeezed her fiancé's hand. Serena's voice softened. "And if we are speaking of love, we must also speak of honesty. Honest love, honest hope, honest business." There it was. Small, elegant, and sharp. The silence that followed was not quite applause. Then Lady Gilchrist clapped, and others joined, because people will follow noise when uncertainty embarrasses them. Johnson's face had gone the colour of old pastry. Serena sat down as if she had said nothing more dangerous than grace. The evening resumed, but badly. The trio began again. Waiters moved. Plates came out bearing small towers of food arranged with more architecture than flavour. Conversations restarted with a cautious brightness. Hamish found himself beside Priscilla near a side table where untouched favours sat in silver bowls. "That was deliberate," he said. "Everything about her is deliberate. You heard it too. I would have had to be dead not to hear it." Elspeth joined them, notebook in hand. "She gives good copy," she said. "She gives trouble," said Priscilla. "Sometimes they are related." Hamish felt the old awkwardness close round him. Priscilla had the advantage of knowing the place from within. Elspeth had the advantage of seeing through people who thought themselves hidden. Both had the additional disadvantage, from Hamish's point of view, of knowing when he was pretending not to care. "I'm away to look at the kitchen passage," he said. "Of course you are," said Elspeth. Priscilla smiled faintly. "Very romantic." He escaped before either could say anything worse. Near the service door, Callum was arguing under his breath with a chambermaid carrying a stack of folded napkins. "I didna say anything," he whispered. "You never do until it's too late," she whispered back. They broke apart when Hamish approached. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Aye," said Callum. "No," said the chambermaid, then flushed. "I mean, yes, I've got napkins. A serious condition." She hurried away. Callum looked after her with misery. "She your sweetheart?" asked Hamish. "No." "That was very quick. She's my cousin." "Ah. Worse." Callum gave him a reluctant look. "She worries." "About what?" "Everything." Before Hamish could press him, Serena appeared at his elbow. "Constable Macbeth," she said. "Do you know anything about hotel accounting? I can count to 10 if folk stand still." "How modest." "I try." She glanced toward the ballroom, where Johnson was bending over Lady Gilchrist's chair with exaggerated attentiveness. "There are duplicate deposits in the booking records," she said quietly. "At least 3, possibly more. Money taken twice, moved about, then explained away as administrative correction." Hamish did not look at Johnson. "You're sure?" "I know the smell of panic when it has been perfumed. I shall speak to the owner in the morning. That may cause a stir. So does theft." "And why tell me?" Her smile changed. For the first time it had no flirtation in it. "Because someone here is selling dream weddings that do not exist. And because if I say it publicly tonight, half those women will cry into their champagne before pudding." Hamish waited. She added, "Also, the antique tea service is insured for a rather interesting sum." "Interesting how?" "More than this weekend is likely to bring in. More than several weekends, I should think. Maybe old silver is dear. Maybe." She looked back toward the tables. "Or maybe poverty makes people discover the value of things they used to take for granted." Across the room, Mr. Johnson lifted his head and saw them together. It was only a glance. But Hamish had seen animals caught in snares look less frightened. Serena touched Hamish's sleeve lightly. "Do not worry, Constable. I am very good at making people tell me what they hope to hide. A dangerous talent." "Yes," she said. "But useful." She left him and returned to the ballroom, where Alasdair Wren rose too quickly to pull out her chair. The mock proposal began soon after. A nervous young man knelt beneath the birch arch before a woman who already knew the answer, while guests laughed and clapped and wiped their eyes. The candles glittered. The roses drooped lower. Rain struck the windows in hard silver lines. Hamish watched Serena smile at the performance. It was a fine smile, polished and bright. But it did not reach her eyes. Chapter 4. The Bridal Suite Door. The next morning, the hotel smelt of wet carpet, cooling toast, and panic carefully postponed. Rain had not stopped in the night. It had merely changed its method. Instead of beating against the windows, it now came slantwise over the lawns in thin grey sheets, making the old stone walls shine darkly and turning the gravel drive into a ribbon of puddles. Hamish had slept badly. This was partly because Blair had telephoned twice before midnight to ask whether there had been any society nonsense, and partly because Luggs had decided that a policeman's bed was improved by occupation. But mostly it was because Serena Lyle's voice had stayed with him. Duplicate deposits. Honest business. More insurance than income. At 8:30, Hamish arrived at Tommel Castle to find the breakfast room performing cheerfulness like a sick actor. Guests spoke in bright, brittle voices. Cutlery sounded too loud. A bride-to-be from Edinburgh sat over untouched scrambled eggs, while her fiancé read the same paragraph of a newspaper 3 times. Priscilla stood near the sideboard, speaking quietly to Mr. Johnson. Johnson looked as if he had been ironed badly. His tie was straight, his jacket brushed, but his face had the grey, pinched look of a man whose sleep had been pursued by arithmetic. "Hamish," Priscilla said when she saw him, "Miss Lyle has not come down." "That unusual?" "She was due to meet Mr. Johnson at 8. Johnson gave a small laugh. "These London people keep their own hours. She asked for tea at 7:30, said Priscilla. Johnson blinked. "Did she?" "A tray went up," she said. Hamish looked at him. "Who took it?" Johnson hesitated. "Callum, I believe. Or one of the girls. We are rather busy." Busy people still know who carried a tray. Before Johnson could reply, a young chambermaid came down the corridor at a run. She was small and fair, with a hotel apron tied too tightly at the waist. Hamish recognised her as the girl who had been whispering with Callum the night before. "Miss Halberton Smythe," she said, breathless. "Mr. Johnson. It's the bridal suite." "What about it?" Johnson snapped. The girl's eyes filled. "She won't answer." For a moment, everyone in the breakfast room pretended not to hear. Then, all at once, everyone heard. Hamish was already moving. The corridor to the bridal suite lay along the older wing of the hotel, where the carpet had faded to a dull red and the walls held the smell of furniture polish that had given up. Wind pressed rain against the tall windows. Somewhere below, a service bell rang once and stopped. At the end of the corridor stood a white door with a brass plaque reading Bridal Suite in curling letters. Beside it, on a small table, was a vase of crushed-looking roses. Callum Firth stood near the stairhead, pale under his carefully combed hair. "I only left the tray," he said, before anyone asked him anything. Hamish turned to him. "When?" "About 7:30. Maybe 20 to 8. Did she answer? No. I knocked. She said to leave it. You heard her? Callum swallowed. Aye. The chambermaid stared at him. What? Said Callum. She didn't, the girl whispered. She didn't answer when I came. Hamish held up a hand before panic could breed. Key. Johnson fumbled at his ring. It took him 3 attempts to find the right one. His hand shook so visibly that Priscilla took the keys from him and passed the correct one to Hamish without comment. Hamish unlocked the door. The bridal suite was still. That was the first thing. Not dramatic, not theatrical, simply still. The curtains were half drawn, giving the room a grey underwater light. A tea tray lay on the small table near the fire, 1 cup overturned in its saucer. A spoon had fallen to the carpet. Rose petals were scattered across the bedspread and crushed near the hearth, as if someone had stepped on them without noticing. The bell pull beside the fireplace hung slightly crooked. Serena Lyle lay near the chaise longue, one hand partly hidden beneath the fall of her cream dressing-gown. There was nothing grand about death in a decorated room. It made the silk cushions look foolish. Priscilla drew in 1 controlled breath behind him. Johnson said, "Oh, my God!" "Out," said Hamish quietly. But out. There was no softness in the word. Johnson obeyed. Priscilla stayed half a second longer, her face pale, then turned and guided the chambermaid away. Hamish crossed the room carefully. He did not touch Serena. He did not need to. Whatever had happened here had happened some time ago. Her beauty, so managed the evening before, had become irrelevant in a way that felt almost rude. He looked instead at the room. The tea tray held a pot, 2 cups, a plate with 1 half-eaten scone, butter, jam, and a little folded room service note sealed with red wax. The wax seal had been pressed flat with care. Beside the sugar bowl lay nothing. Hamish looked again. No silver sugar tongs. There were ordinary brass tongs on the tray, pantry tongs, cheap and practical, not the antique pair from the tea service, not the bent-clawed silver tongs Serena had handled in the drawing-room. He leaned closer to the room service note. On the red wax was a tiny crescent impression, neat, curved, familiar, the same shape the bent claw had left in the icing of the petit four. Hamish straightened slowly. Behind him, Blair's voice came roaring up the corridor. "Where is he? Where's Macbeth? Has he contaminated everything already?" Blair entered the bridal suite in a rush of wet coat, tobacco, and authority. He stopped when he saw Serena, then recovered himself by becoming louder. "Love quarrel," he announced. Hamish looked at him. "You've not been in the room 10 seconds. I've seen enough. Woman like that. Hotel full of romantics. Some jealous idiot loses his head. Aye. That'll save time." Blair scowled. "Don't you get clever with me? Who found her?" The chambermaid raised the alarm. "Callum says he brought the tray." "Callum?" "The pretty waiter." "The waiter." Blair gave a short, satisfied grunt. "There you are." "There I am where? He was sniffing round her all yesterday. These young lads get ideas. She laughs at him. He takes it wrong. Next thing you've written your report before asking him." Blair's face darkened. "Macbeth." Hamish's voice stayed mild. "There's a missing piece from the tray." "What piece?" "Silver sugar tongs." Blair stared. "A woman's dead, and you're bothering about cutlery? Sometimes cutlery is less determined to lie." Blair turned away in disgust and shouted for the room to be sealed, though half his officers had not yet arrived. In the corridor, guests whispered behind closed doors. Someone began crying quietly. Someone else asked whether breakfast would still be served, and was immediately shushed by 3 people who had been wondering the same thing. Hamish took one last look at the crooked bell-pull, the wax-sealed note, the cheap brass tongs, and the crushed rose petals. The prettiness of the room had not hidden anything. It had only made the wrong things harder to look at. Chapter 5. Canteen pudding, proper soup. Blair liked a suspect who stood where he was put. Callum Firth, unfortunately for himself, did exactly that. He stood in the hotel manager's office with his hands by his sides, his bandaged thumb tucked into his palm, and his face changing colour every time Blair barked a question. The office was too small for all of them. It had a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a portrait of some long-dead hotel founder year, and a view over the service yard where rainwater ran off the roof in steady threads. Mr. Johnson's papers were stacked with the nervous precision of a man who believed tidiness might be mistaken for innocence. Blair planted himself in front of Callum. "You took the tray up." "Yes." "You fancied her." "No." "You're lying." Callum's jaw tightened. "I served her tea." "You served her more than tea, I'll wager." The boy flushed so violently that Blair smiled. Hamish, leaning against the filing cabinet, said, "That's a question looking for a scandal, not an answer." Blair rounded on him. "I'll conduct this interview. You're conducting a pantomime." Callum looked between them, frightened and ashamed, and that troubled Hamish more than a bold denial would have done. People who were guilty often performed innocence. Callum looked like a young man discovering how quickly embarrassment could be turned into evidence. Blair jabbed a finger toward him. "You were seen near her room." "I work here." "You carried a tray. That's also work. Don't get clever with me." "He's no being clever," said Hamish. "He's being factual. It's rarer, so you might not recognize it." Blair's face darkened. "Out, Macbeth. I'm attached to the local inquiry." "You're attached to my patience by a very thin string." The door opened before Hamish could answer. Priscilla stood there, calm but pale. "Mr. Johnson says guests are asking whether they may leave." "They can leave when I say they can," snapped Blair. "That answer may not improve the atmosphere." "I'm not here to improve the atmosphere." "No," said Priscilla. "That is evident." Callum made a small sound that might have been a laugh if fear had not strangled it. Blair turned back to him. "Where were you at 11:20 last night?" Callum blinked. 11:20? "Aye. Don't pretend you don't understand clocks." "I was clearing from the ballroom, then pantry, then I went out back for a smoke." "With whom?" "No one." "Convenient. It was raining." "Folk don't queue for cigarettes in rain." Hamish watched Priscilla's eyes move to the old service bell board on the office wall. It was a handsome thing. Polished wood and brass labels. Drawing room, library, bridal suite, room 6, pantry, and other little windows where old-fashioned flags trembled when bells were rung. "Did the bridal suite bell ring last night?" Hamish asked. Johnson, who had been hovering near the desk, said, too quickly, "I don't recall." Hamish turned to him. "You don't recall a bell from the room of your most important guest?" "We had many calls." "Then you'll have a record?" "It is not a telephone exchange, Constable. It is an old hotel," Priscilla said. "The night staff usually note late calls in the service book." Johnson looked at her as if she had betrayed him by knowing how the place worked. Blair slapped the desk. "Enough about bells. We have a dead woman and a young buck with a grievance." Callum's eyes flashed. "I had no grievance." "She mocked you." "She mocked everyone." There was a moment of silence after that. Hamish said gently, "Did she mock Mr. Johnson too?" Callum shut his mouth. Blair leaned in. "Answer him." "I don't know. You just said everyone." "It was just talk." "Talk can hang a man," said Blair, with satisfaction. That was the point at which Hamish stopped leaning and stood straight. "No," he said quietly. "Careless policing can." Blair stared at him. For a few seconds, the little office held only the sound of rain and the faint clatter of crockery from somewhere below. Then Blair shoved past him and opened the door. "We're taking the lad to Strathbane." "On what charge?" "For questioning." "That's not a charge." "It's a start." Callum went white. Priscilla stepped aside as Blair called for an officer. Her expression did not change, but Hamish knew her well enough to see she was troubled. She had come to Tommel Castle to help polish a weekend, not watch a frightened waiter being bundled into an official theory because he fitted it neatly. As Callum was led out, he looked once at Hamish. It was not a plea exactly. It was worse. It was the look of someone who had expected very little from life and was still disappointed. At Strathbane, The canteen lunch looked as though it had been assembled by people who had heard of food but distrusted it. Blair ate with appetite. That was one of the many things Hamish found suspicious about him. "You're soft on him," Blair said, stabbing at a pudding whose colour suggested old wallpaper. "I'm interested in whether he did it. He had motive. He had embarrassment. Same thing with lads like that. He had opportunity. So did half the hotel. He was seen with a tray. He is a waiter." Blair swallowed. "You always have to make things difficult." "No. Murder usually does that before I arrive." On the table between them lay Serena Lyle's notebook in a plastic evidence sleeve. It had been found in her handbag, which had been tucked beneath a chair in the Bridal Suite. Hamish had read it twice. Serena's handwriting was sharp, slanting, impatient. Most entries were social observations, names, jewellery, family connections, who drank too quickly, who lied about money, who showed affection when watched. Then came the line that mattered. Deposits transferred twice. Initials M, J. After that, a page had been torn out. Not roughly. Carefully. Close to the binding. Hamish tapped the sleeve. "That page is what frightens me." Blair wiped his mouth. "Frightens you?" "It makes it simple. The lad found out she'd written about him. There's nothing here about Callum. Maybe on the missing page. Maybe it said you're handsome and wise. We can all hope for impossible things." Blair glared. A young constable came in with a message slip. "Sir, the night porter says the Bridal Suite bell rang at 11:20. He remembers. Because he'd just looked at the clock before checking the back doors." Blair brightened. "There. She was alive at 11:20. "Who answered the bell?" asked Hamish. The constable looked uncomfortable. "No one admits to it, sir." Blair's smile thinned. Hamish leaned back. "That's interesting. It means the porter's useless. It means someone rang from that room, or wanted the hotel to think someone did." Blair pushed away his plate. "You and your bells." "Aye. Bells, wax, missing tongs, missing page, and a pretty waiter." Hamish looked at him. "You like him for it because everyone else likes him for it. That makes me nervous." By late afternoon, Hamish escaped Strathbane with the notebook details in his head and the canteen pudding sitting in his stomach like an official secret. He drove back toward Lochdu through rain that had softened to mist. The hills came and went. Sheep stood with the mournful patience of creatures who had never trusted weather in the first place. He stopped at the Italian restaurant on the way back, where the owner, Lucia, took one look at him and put soup down without asking. "You look like police food has happened," she said. It wasn't a food. It was evidence of decline. She gave him bread, still warm. He sat by the window with the bowl between his hands and felt his mind begin to work properly again. Good soup did that. It did not solve crime, but it made Spare less official. Elspeth found him there 10 minutes later. "I thought you might hide somewhere edible," she said, sliding into the chair opposite. "I'm not hiding. You're eating with the expression of a man who has survived an institution. Strathbane can do that to a soul." She opened her notebook. "Is Callum Firth being charged?" "No." "Will Blair charge him anyway?" "Possibly with being convenient." Elspeth's pencil moved. "Was Serena really investigating the hotel accounts?" Hamish looked at her. She smiled. "That is not a denial. It is a silence. I've built a career on those." He tore a piece of bread. "Careful what you print?" "I am careful." "You're sharp." "That's not always the same." For once, she did not answer quickly. Then she said, "Priscilla thinks the hotel is in more trouble than Johnson admits." Hamish's hand stilled. "Priscilla told you that?" She asked whether I knew anything about wedding deposits being delayed. She was trying to sound casual. "She's no good at casual when she's worried." "No," said Elspeth. "She's very good at making worry look like good manners." A small silence opened between them. Hamish looked out at the rain. He thought of Priscilla in the hotel office, noticing the bellboard. He thought of Serena's missing page. He thought of Callum's frightened face and Johnson's tight hands on the folder in the conservatory. Elspeth closed her notebook. "You don't think Callum did it?" "I think Callum is vain, foolish, and frightened. That describes half the male population. Aye, but we canna arrest them all." She smiled, despite herself. When Hamish returned to Tommel Castle, the drawing-room was full of guests pretending to read. Nobody turned pages. Cups cooled beside untouched cakes. The romance weekend had become a waiting room, with roses. Priscilla met him near the staircase. "The Bridal Suite bell did ring at 11:20, she said quietly. "The night porter is certain." "Who went up?" "That is the trouble. Everyone says someone else must have. Hotels run on someone else." She looked toward Johnson's office. "Mr. Johnson says the porter may have confused the time." "And do you believe him?" "I believe," said Priscilla, "that he is measuring every sentence before he spends it." Hamish glanced up the staircase toward the Bridal Suite corridor. Somewhere in the hotel, an old service bell gave a faint metallic tremble, then fell silent. No one moved toward it. And that, Hamish thought, was the most truthful thing he had seen all day. Chapter 6. The Easy Waiter. The hotel pantry was a narrow kingdom of chipped plates, damp coats, and people speaking in whispers that stopped whenever a door opened. Hamish found Callum Firth there just after 6, sitting on an upturned crate beside a stack of soup bowls. He had been released from Strathbane without charge, which should have comforted him, but in a village hotel that only meant the gossip had more time to improve itself. Callum looked up sharply. "If you've come to ask it all again, I've said it." "Then you'll be quicker this time." "I didna kill her." "That's usually the last question, not the first." Callum rubbed his bandaged thumb against his trouser seam. The gesture was nervous, but not practiced. Hamish took a wooden chair from beside the flour bin and sat down. Outside the narrow pantry window, the kitchen yard glistened under the rain. A delivery van stood by the bins. Beyond it, the service stair climbed against the old wall, slick and dark. "Tell me about the tray," said Hamish. Callum sighed. "Tea, scones, jam, butter. 2 cups, because Miss Lyle said she might have someone up." "Who? She didna say." "And the tongs?" Callum frowned. "What tongs?" "For sugar." "Oh. Brass ones from here." He nodded toward a drawer. "The silver things were for the drawing-room. Mr. Johnson said not to use them upstairs in case guests walked off with them." "Did he now?" "Aye. He was always saying folk stole from hotels. Towels, spoons, dignity." Hamish opened the drawer. Inside lay several cheap brass sugar tongs, practical and dull. He lifted one pair and closed the claws. They made no crescent, only a flat pinch. "You took these?" "Ah, yea." "And you sealed the room service note?" "No. Cook did. She seals them when there's special service. Makes the place look fancy." "Who wrote it?" "Mr. Johnson wrote the card. Cook put it on the tray." Hamish had seen the note. A flourish in Johnson's hand. "With compliments of Tommel Castle. May your morning be sweet." A ridiculous sentence, now made grotesque by circumstance. "Was the seal dry when you carried it upstairs?" Callum looked at him as if this were a trick. "Aye. It would have smeared otherwise." "Did you touch it?" "No." "Did Miss Lyle open the door?" "No. Like I told them, she said to leave it." "What exactly did she say?" Callum stared at the floor. "Callum," she said. "Leave it there." "Those words?" "Aye." "Was it her voice?" The young man swallowed. "I thought so." "You thought so then. What do you think now?" Callum's face tightened. "I don't know." There it was. Not confession. Memory beginning to fear itself. The pantry door swung open, and Blair came in as if the room belonged to his boots. "Well, well," he said. "The beauty and the watchdog." Callum stood so quickly the crate tipped behind him. "Sit down," said Hamish. "Stand up," said Blair. Callum half bent, half rose, and looked miserable enough to satisfy both commands. Blair pointed at him. "You took flowers to her room." Callum went red. Hamish turned to him. "Did you?" "Aye." "When?" "After the reception." "About 10. Why?" "She asked for fresh ones. Said the roses in her room looked like they'd lost hope." Blair snorted. "And you fancied your chances?" "No. You're a handsome lad. You knew it. Women like that make fools of handsome lads." Callum's vanity, which had survived fear, rose instinctively. "I'm not a fool." "That's debatable," said Blair. "You were seen arguing near the Bridal Suite. She laughed at me." "Ah, it wasn't like that." Callum's hands clenched. "She said I was wasted carrying trays and that rich widows liked a bit of Highland prettiness. She said I should learn to pour whiskey with my eyes." Blair grinned. "And you didna like being told the truth?" Callum's face changed. For a moment Hamish saw the real wound. Not seduction, not jealousy. Shame. "I don't want to be here forever," Callum said. "That's all." Blair leaned closer. "So when she mocked you, you lost your temper?" "No. You carried a tray in the morning. You heard her voice." "Or you say you did." "There's no one to contradict you now." Callum looked sick. Hamish's own voice became very quiet. "That'll do." Blair turned. "What? You're trying to make him angry enough to sound guilty." "I'm trying to get the truth." "No. You're trying to get a shape that fits your report." Blair's mouth hardened. "Careful, Macbeth." Hamish did not move. "I am being careful. That's the difference." A kitchen maid appeared in the doorway, saw Blair, and tried to vanish. Hamish stopped her gently. "Mayrie, is it?" She nodded. "You saw Callum with the tray yesterday morning?" "This morning," she whispered. "This morning." "Aye. Was it the tray from this pantry?" "Yes." "With brass tongs?" She looked frightened, then nodded again. "I put them there." Blair waved a hand. "Tongs, tongs, tongs. Who cares what metal they were?" "I do," said Hamish. He turned to Callum. "Show me your cuffs." Callum stared. "Your shirt cuffs." Slowly, Callum held out his arms. The right cuff was clean. The left cuff carried a small reddish stain near the edge. Blair pounced. "Blood." "Jam?" said Callum at once. Hamish bent closer. It was dull red, sticky at the seam. "Raspberry," said Myrie. The jar cracked. He caught it before it fell. "When?" "Before breakfast trays went up." "So before Serena's tray left the pantry," said Hamish. Blair folded his arms. "And that clears him how?" "It doesna clear him. It tells us what sort of morning he had. That's not police work. It is if you pay attention." Hamish took from his pocket a sketch he had made of the wax seal impression. A small crescent mark, neat and sharp. The wax on the room service note was marked by the bent claw of the antique silver tongs, not by the brass pair in this pantry. Callum looked bewildered. Blair looked annoyed. Hamish went on. "The note was already sealed when Callum carried the tray. Mary says she put brass tongs on it. Cook sealed the note below, but the crescent mark was made after that, after the note left this pantry and went upstairs," Blair said. "Or he swapped the tongs." "With what?" "He didn't have the antique pair. Johnson said they were kept downstairs for display. And Callum is many things, but he's no subtle enough to murder a woman and then stage a clue with hotel silver." Callum looked offended despite himself. "I could be subtle." "No, you couldna," said Hamish. "That's in your favour." Myrie made a small sound, almost a laugh, then covered it with her hand. Blair glared at them all. "You're letting sentiment blind you." "No. I'm letting facts irritate you." The kitchen door banged somewhere beyond the passage. Voices rose, then dropped. The whole hotel seemed to be listening through walls. Hamish looked back to Callum. "You went up with the tray. You heard a voice say, 'Leave it there.' You left it. Did you see anyone in the corridor?" Callum hesitated. "Now would be the time. I saw Mr. Wren." Alastair Wren?" "Aye. Coming from the far end, near the old staircase. He had a note in his hand." "What kind of note?" White paper. Folded. Red seal, maybe? I don't know. Blair slapped his palm with satisfaction. There! Jealous old fool! Hamish ignored him. Did Wren see you? Aye. He looked right through me. That sounds like him. Callum lowered his voice. He was upset. Not angry. Embarrassed like. Why didn't you say before? Because I thought they'd ask what I was doing staring at guests. And because Mr. Wren tips well. There was no dignity in the answer. But there was truth. Hamish stood. Go back to work if Mr. Johnson will have you. Callum gave a bitter laugh. Guests don't want tea from a murderer. You're not a murderer. Try telling the guests. I may have to. Blair followed Hamish out into the service corridor. You're making a mistake. I usually save my mistakes for women and sheep. You've got your head turned because the lad looks pathetic. No, said Hamish. I've got my head turned because the wrong tongs made the right mark at the wrong time. Blair stared at him as if he had spoken Gaelic under water. At the end of the corridor, Mr. Johnson stood outside his office, one hand on the doorframe. He had clearly heard enough to know that Callum was no longer the neat answer everyone wanted. His face, for a passing second, showed not relief, but calculation. Then he saw Hamish watching him and put on sorrow like a jacket. Poor boy, Johnson said. This has been dreadful for the staff. Aye, said Hamish. It's hard on folk when a story willna stay simple. Johnson's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Behind them in the pantry, Callum laughed once at something Mary said, a short, shaken laugh, alive with relief and humiliation. Hamish walked toward the yard window and looked out at the service stair, the rain-dark wall, and the bins where any small thing might vanish if thrown quickly enough. The false answer had been easy. The truth, he suspected, had taken the stairs. Chapter 7. Hamish's big mistake. By the next afternoon, Tommel Castle had begun to behave like a ship with water in the lower decks. Nobody shouted at first. That was how Hamish knew the damage was spreading. Guests spoke politely, but their voices had developed edges. Brides checked folders. Fiancés made telephone calls from corners, and returned looking as if romance had become arithmetic. Mothers whispered with the intensity of military planners. In the lobby, 2 armchairs had been turned slightly toward one another, creating the impression of a private meeting place. Within an hour, everyone used it to exchange rumours. I only want to know whether our date is secure, said the Edinburgh bride, clutching a pale folder to her chest. Of course it is, said Mr. Johnson. And our deposit entirely secure. And the second deposit? Johnson's face changed by a fraction too small for most people and too large for Hamish. There has been some administrative confusion. The bride's fiancé, a thin young man with careful hair, said, We paid what your office asked us to pay. Quite twice. Johnson smiled. I am sure that is not the case. My mother keeps receipts, said the bride. That was the sort of sentence that had destroyed stronger men than Marcus Johnson. Hamish stood near the staircase and watched Johnson retreat into soft assurances. Beside him, Priscilla's face was composed, but there was a faint tightness around her mouth. You knew this was coming, she said quietly. I knew there might be questions. You did not tell me how serious. I'm no sure yet. Hamish, he turned to her. Serena had a note in her book. Duplicate deposits. Initials MJ. A page is missing. That's all I can prove. And you think Mr. Johnson is involved? I think he's frightened. Frightened men can still be innocent. Aye. And guilty men can still look useful. She looked across the lobby, where Johnson had taken the bride's mother aside and was nodding with the grave sympathy of a funeral director. Priscilla lowered her voice. If the guests panic, the hotel may not survive the weekend. If Serena was right, some of those guests may already have lost money. That is precisely why panic would be cruel, Hamish sighed. There were many things about Priscilla that irritated him, and near the top of the list was her habit of being right in a way that did not make him wrong. I need you not to mention the duplicate deposit note, he said. Her eyes sharpened. To anyone? Not until I can confirm it from the ledger or bank records. You think I gossip? No. Then what do you think? I think you protect things. Sometimes before you've decided whether they deserve it. That landed. He saw it. Priscilla's voice cooled. And you think you do not? Before he could answer, Elspeth came through the front doors, rain on her shoulders, and printer's ink almost visible in her expression. She carried herself with the alert brightness of a woman who had found news trying to hide behind curtains. The lobby is interesting, she said. It's a hotel lobby, said Hamish. Not today. Today it's a confession box with carpets. Priscilla looked at her. If you are here to inflame matters, I am here to report them. That is not always a different thing. Elspeth accepted this without offence. No, but sometimes silence does more damage. Hamish could feel the conversation closing around him like bad weather. Both of you, he said, leave the deposits alone until I've more than a dead woman's torn notebook and Johnson's nerves. Elspeth's pencil was already in her hand. That was almost a statement. It was almost a warning. She smiled. You're improving. By 3 o'clock, Hamish discovered his warning had lasted less than an hour. It had not begun as gossip. That was the trouble. Gossip usually knew what it was. This had begun as care. Priscilla, seeing Callum return to the pantry to find 2 chambermaids weeping and cook threatening to walk out if wages were at risk, had gone to Johnson and said, in a low voice, that he must steady the staff before speculation became panic. She had not mentioned Serena's notebook. She had not used the word theft. She had said only that financial worries were circulating and must be handled honestly. Johnson, hearing honesty, had apparently gone pale enough to frighten the assistant manager. The assistant manager had told Cook there might be a review of deposits. Cook had told Mary not to worry about her sister's wedding money. Mary had asked why she should worry about her sister's wedding money. By tea-time, the hotel knew that Hamish Macbeth had proof Tommel Castle had stolen from brides. It was a magnificent example of how a rumour could travel faster than truth because it carried less baggage. The lobby filled. Not dramatically at first. A few guests came down with folders. Then more. Then a mother from Dundee arrived with a handbag full of receipts and a voice trained by years of school committees. I am not accusing anyone, she announced, in a tone that accused the wallpaper, but I would like our deposit returned immediately. Johnson stood near the reception desk, smiling as if his teeth hurt. There is no need for alarm. That is what people say when there is a need for alarm, said the woman. The Edinburgh bride began crying. Her fiancé, helpless in the face of tears and accountancy, patted her shoulder in the wrong rhythm. Callum appeared at the pantry door and vanished again. Hamish moved toward the desk, but too late. Elspeth was already by the fireplace, speaking quietly with the bride's mother. Her notebook was out. Priscilla saw it and looked at Hamish. That look was worse than blame. It said, We both tried to prevent this, and we both helped cause it. Blair arrived at 4:30, bringing with him wet smoke and the satisfaction of a man who had been told someone else had made a mess. What the devil is this? He barked. A hotel, said Hamish, under strain. It looks like a riot with cushions. A guest turned. Are we allowed to leave? Blair pointed at him. No, that did not help. Another guest said, Are we under arrest? Don't tempt me, said Blair. That helped even less. Priscilla stepped in before the room could ignite. Ladies and gentlemen, no one is under arrest. Mr. Johnson will prepare a written statement regarding all wedding deposits. Until then, please do not rely on corridor rumours. Corridor rumours? Said the Dundee mother. My dear, corridor rumours are all we have been offered. Johnson lifted both hands. Every client will be answered privately. No, said Hamish. The room turned. Johnson looked at him with something like hatred before smoothing it away. Constable? No private answers. Not now. Make a list of every booking represented here, every deposit paid, every receipt held. Give copies to the police. Blair puffed himself up. I'll decide what comes to the police. Aye, said Hamish. Decide quickly, then. Blair's eyes bulged. Macbeth, outside. In the rain? Now. They stepped into the porch, where the wind pushed damp air under the stone arch. Blair rounded on him. Have you lost what little mind you had? You've turned a murder inquiry into a wedding accounts fair. I didna start the deposits. You started the panic. I asked for quiet. Then you're worse at quiet than you are at promotion. Hamish looked past him at the grey lawns, the dripping roses in their tubs, and the guests' shapes moving behind the lobby windows. Serena was killed after finding something in those records. You don't know that. No. But I know the person who took the missing page didna want us reading it. Blair jabbed a finger into his chest. You make me look bad in front of guests again, and I'll have you back in Strathbane checking bicycle bells. You'll have to find someone there who knows what bells mean first. Blair's face darkened dangerously. Before he could reply, Elspeth appeared in the porch doorway. I thought you should know, she said. My editor has put up a short piece. Hamish closed his eyes briefly. How short? Very restrained. That's not an answer. She handed him the early printout from the hotel office computer. The headline was modest by newspaper standards and ruinous by hotel ones. Financial unease at Highland, romance showcase after guest's death. Hamish read the first paragraph. It named no accusation, repeated no unproven fact, and did everything legally decent while still making Tommel Castle sound like a place where love went to lose its wallet. Blair snatched it. Press! Vultures in better shoes! Elspeth looked at his boots. Some of us aim higher. Inside, the lobby noise rose again. Hamish handed the page back. This will make them worse. I know, said Elspeth. Then why print it? Because some of those couples may have other payments due tomorrow. Because if the hotel is moving money, silence protects the wrong person. And because Serena Lyle is dead. There was no triumph in her voice. That made it harder to be angry. Later, when the first refunds were demanded in writing and Johnson had locked himself in his office with the ledger he had previously claimed was not ready, Hamish found Myrie in the service corridor. She was folding napkins with such force that each one came out looking punished. You saw someone, he said. Her hands stopped. No, I haven't said when. She began folding again. I'm busy. Near the Bridal Suite corridor. Last night or this morning? I didna see. Mary. The napkin shook in her hands. My sister's wedding is booked here, she whispered. December. Hamish said nothing. She and Callum Macrae saved 2 years. If the hotel closes, she loses it. If I say the wrong thing, Mr. Johnson says staff may not be kept on. My mother needs my wages. What did you see? She looked at him then, eyes wet with anger rather than fear. You can ask that because your house doesn't depend on this place. It was unfair, but not false enough to dismiss. Hamish's voice softened. A woman is dead. I know, and someone is using fear to keep you quiet. She turned away. I saw no face, but you saw someone. A long silence. Only a back, she said at last. Someone coming from the old stair after the bell. That's all. Man or woman, I don't know. You do? She pressed the folded napkin flat. A man's coat. Dark. Moving fast. That's all I'll say. Was it Callum? Her answer came at once. No. Was it Alastair Wren? She shut her mouth. There it was again. Not a yes, not a no, but a door closing. Hamish left her with the napkins and walked back toward the lobby. There were moments in an inquiry when truth did not hide because it was clever. It hid because ordinary people had rent, sisters, wages, pride, and fear. The law liked clean answers. Life preferred tangled ones. In the drawing room, the tea had gone cold. Priscilla stood by the window, looking out at the rain. Elspeth sat near the fire, writing nothing. Johnson's office door remained shut. Hamish felt the weight of his own mistake settle on him. He had tried to keep panic from the room. Instead, he had given it better shoes and a timetable. Chapter Y. Sonsie on the Sill. By the time Hamish returned to Lochdu, the rain had lost its temper. It no longer hammered the roofs or drove in sheets across the road. It settled instead into a fine, drifting mist that made the village lights glow softly and turned the harbour into a blur of ropes, boats, and wet stone. The sort of weather, Hamish thought, that encouraged people to stay indoors and say unhelpful things beside fires. His police station kitchen was warmer than he deserved. The stove ticked softly. A kettle stood ready. Luggs had taken possession of the mat near the hearth and lifted one eye when Hamish came in, as if deciding whether the day's failures required comment. "They do not," Hamish told him. Luggs closed the eye again. Hamish took off his wet coat, hung it behind the door, and stood for a moment listening to the quiet. It was a good quiet, not like the Bridal Suite. This quiet had a kettle in it, old wood, damp wool, dog breath, and the faint smell of the bacon he had meant to save and had not. He made tea, and sat at the table with Serena Lyle's case spread before him in pieces. Not official pieces. Blair had the official pieces, and had already arranged them into the shape of Callum Firth whenever possible. Hamish had the awkward ones. A dead woman who had found duplicate deposits. A missing notebook page. A bell at 11:20 that no one admitted answering. A tray with brass tongs. A wax seal marked by silver tongs. A hotel manager who measured sentences like coins. A chambermaid who had seen a man's dark coat leaving by the old stair and was too frightened to name him. Hamish drew a small crescent on the edge of his notepad. Then he drew another. The mark bothered him because it was so delicate. Murder, in Blair's mind, was heavy-footed. It came with jealousy, shouted words, and young men losing control. This mark was not like that. It belonged to someone who had taken time after the fact. Someone careful enough to lift or press wax without tearing paper. Someone who wanted the morning to tell a different story from the night. The window gave a faint tap. Hamish looked up. Nothing. He listened. Another tap. Then a scrape. Light and insulting. Luggs lifted his head, gave the window a look of deep professional suspicion, and decided that whatever was outside had not yet become his responsibility. Hamish rose and crossed to the sill. Sonsie was there. The cat sat beyond the glass in the wet, dark black fur, clinging slightly along its shoulders, tail moving once with the impatience of a creature who had performed a service and found the audience slow. Something small and silver lay beneath one paw. Hamish opened the window. Cold mist slipped into the kitchen. Sonsie stepped in without invitation, dropped the object on the sill, and sprang to the floor as if entering human houses were a regrettable necessity. "What have you brought me, then?" Sonsie ignored him, and went to inspect Luggs's bowl. Luggs stood at once, offended into action. "No," said Hamish. "Both of you. Peace." Neither animal believed in peace, but both believed in Hamish's tone when it promised inconvenience. Sonsie withdrew to the chair by the range and began washing one paw with exaggerated privacy. Hamish picked up the silver object. At first he thought it was a broken hairpin or the hook from a curtain tie. Then he turned it in the lamplight and felt his pulse alter. It was one half of the missing sugar tongs. "Not the whole pair. One arm only," snapped cleanly at the hinge. The little engraved stem was bent. At the end, the claw curved inward, fine and damaged. Caught round the hinge was a thread. White linen. Hotel linen, by the look of it. Fine. Close woven, with a faint trace of laundry starch. The metal was smeared near the claw with a dull red mark. Hamish did not touch the smear. He fetched an envelope, then stopped. Blair would have roared about contamination, but Blair would also have overlooked the thing entirely if it had been served with toast. Hamish took a clean jam jar from the cupboard, tipped the broken arm carefully inside, and screwed on the lid. Then he held the jar under the lamp. Red wax. Not jam, not blood, not icing. Wax. The same red wax that had sealed the room service note in the Bridal Suite. Hamish sat down slowly. Luggs came over and sniffed the jar, then sneezed with contempt. "Aye," said Hamish. "You prefer evidence with gravy." He looked at Sonsie. The cat sat with its back half turned, the picture of innocence badly performed. "Where did you get it?" Sonsie blinked. Hamish knew better than to expect an answer, though he had known people at Strathbane who provided less useful testimony than that. He stood again, put on his wet coat, and opened the kitchen door. Sonsie slipped out before him. "Of course," said Hamish. "You'll lead only if it suits you." It suited the cat for nearly 30 yards. Sonsie crossed the road, passed behind the doctor's house, and vanished through a gap in a wall with the liquid silence of a small thief. Hamish followed as far as human dignity allowed, then lost him in the mist. But he did not need a full map. Cats carried trophies from places they found interesting. Sonsie had been seen before round Tommel Castle's service yard, where kitchen scraps, warm vents, and careless humans made excellent hunting. If the broken tong had been thrown there, or dropped in panic, the cat might easily have found it. Thrown there, Hamish stood in the damp lane and imagined it. Someone in the Bridal Suite, after Serena was dead or dying, needed the note to look untouched. The room service card had mattered. Perhaps it proved when the tray arrived. Perhaps it carried handwriting, timing, or some small sign that contradicted the story being built. The silver tongs were used not for sugar, but for wax. A bent claw slipped under the seal, or pressed it down again. The claw caught. The hinge snapped. One half remained in the hand. One half was discarded. Then later, perhaps in haste, perhaps from a pocket, the broken piece had gone out into the service yard with a scrap of hotel linen clinging to it. Hamish returned to the station, with his head full of old bells and newer lies. The kitchen had resumed its peace. Lugs had reclaimed the warm mat. Sonsie, with the shamelessness of a creature above law, had come in through the still-open window and taken the chair nearest the stove. Hamish sat at the table and opened his notebook. He wrote, "Sugar tongs not stolen for value. Broken during staging." Then, wax mark made after tray sealed below. Then, who knew silver tongs were available? Who could reach them? Who knew bell system? Who needed time changed? The answers did not yet form a name, but they were moving away from Callum. They were moving away from simple jealousy, away from the easy shame of a handsome young waiter and a lonely older guest. They were moving inward, toward the hotel itself. At 10:30, the telephone rang. Hamish lifted the receiver. Macbeth. There was a pause, then Priscilla's voice. "I hope I am not calling too late. You are, but I was awake. I thought you would be." "That's no compliment." "No?" He heard, behind her, the low murmur of hotel voices and the faint clink of china. "Mr. Johnson has agreed to let the police see the booking ledger tomorrow morning," she said. "That's generous of him, seeing as he was going to have to. He says he wants to clear the hotel's name. What do you say?" Pause. "I say he has had all day to decide what clearing means." Hamish smiled, despite the hour. "You should have been a policeman." "I prefer clean carpets. You've not spent enough time at Strathbane." "Hamish." Her voice had changed. "Aye? Be careful tomorrow." "Mr. Johnson is frightened, but he is not stupid." "No. And frightened, intelligent men can be rather dangerous." After he put down the phone, Hamish looked at the jam jar under the lamp. The broken silver claw glinted inside, red wax dark along its edge. A small thing, made for sweetness and ceremony. Now it sat on his kitchen table like a quiet accusation. Chapter 9. The Guest Who Loved Too Loudly. Alastair Wren was waiting in the smoking room, as if he had been arranged there by a sentimental decorator. He sat in a deep leather chair beside the cold fireplace, one polished shoe crossed over the other, a glass of whisky untouched on the table at his elbow. The room had once been masculine in the old hotel sense. Dark panelling, stag heads, cigar stains in places no polish could reach. Now it looked like a museum display of confidence that had gone out of fashion. Alastair looked up when Hamish entered. "I suppose you've come about Miss Lyle?" I wondered when you would." His voice had the weary dignity of a man who had rehearsed sorrow and found it flattering. He was in his late 50s, perhaps older, with silver hair brushed back too carefully and a silk handkerchief folded in his breast pocket. His aftershave had reached the door before Hamish. "Mind if I sit?" "Please." Hamish took the chair opposite. Rain moved faintly against the windows, softer now, and somewhere beyond the wall a maid's trolley rattled along the corridor. "You knew Serena Lyle before this weekend?" asked Hamish. "Not knew. I had met her." "Where?" "At a charity dinner in Edinburgh. Then again at a book launch. She remembered me." That last sentence carried more weight than the others. A memorable thing, being remembered. Alastair smiled sadly. "When one has spent years being half of a couple, one is surprised to discover how quickly one becomes no one at all." Hamish said nothing. "My wife, Margaret, was the social one," Alastair went on. "She knew names, dates, allergies, which cousin had quarrelled with which aunt. After she died, invitations became fewer. Then they stopped pretending there had been a mistake." "And Miss Lyle made you feel seen again?" Alastair looked into his whisky. "That sounds pathetic when said by a policeman. It sounded human." The older man's face softened, then tightened again, as if he had caught himself accepting kindness. "I wrote her a note," he said. "I know. Do you?" "I know you were seen near the Bridal Suite with one." His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the glass, though he still did not drink. "It was foolish. Most notes written after dinner are. I asked whether she might join me for a walk when the rain cleared. There, you may laugh. I've heard worse proposals." "It was not a proposal." "No?" "No. But the protest came too quickly, and they both heard it." Hamish waited. Alastair sighed. "She had a way of making conversation feel private, even when it was not. A dangerous kindness, perhaps. Or a professional one." "What happened when you gave her the note?" "I did not give it to her." Hamish leaned back. "Why not?" "I lost courage." "Where?" "At the top of the old stair." "You went to her room." "I went toward her room. That's a Highland measure. It covers a lot of distance." Alastair gave him a tired look. "I heard voices." "What voices?" A man's voice. Low, urgent. "Hers, I think, though I could not make out the words." I stood there like an idiot with my note in my hand, then decided that a man of my age should have more sense than to hover outside a woman's bedroom. "So you left?" "Yes." "Did anyone see you?" "The waiter. Callum. He was carrying a tray." "The morning tray?" Alastair frowned. "No. Night. A small tray. A pot of hot water, perhaps. I don't know." Hamish's mind paused. "Callum says he saw you in the morning. Then Callum is mistaken, or I am." Alastair rubbed his forehead. "Everything has folded together since." Hamish studied him. "Shame made poor timekeepers of people. So did fear. Where is the note now?" Alastair reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded sheet of white hotel paper. It was sealed with red wax, the seal unbroken. "I kept it," he said. "God knows why." Hamish accepted it carefully. The wax was smooth, pressed with the hotel crest, perhaps from the desk seal downstairs. No crescent dent, no bent claw mark. "You never opened it again?" "No." "Mind if I do?" Alastair's mouth twisted. "It cannot make me look more foolish than I already feel." Hamish broke the wax and unfolded the paper. The note was brief, formal, and aching with embarrassment beneath its careful phrasing. "Dear Miss Lyle, if the weather clears, I should be honoured if you would permit me to show you the old garden walk. It is quite fine in the evening light. Yours sincerely, Alas Dair Vryn." There was nothing indecent in it, nothing threatening. Its very restraint made it sadder. Hamish refolded it. "Did you argue with her?" "No. You were seen speaking sharply near the ballroom." Alastair coloured. "She teased me about my wife." "How?" "She said widowers are often more loyal to memory in public than in private." Hamish winced inwardly. "And you took offence." "I said she mistook cruelty for intelligence." "That's not bad." She laughed. "And then?" "And then I drank too much and wrote a note asking her to walk with me. People are not consistent, Constable. It is one of our uglier freedoms." The words were too neat, but the pain behind them was not. Hamish looked toward the service bell panel mounted near the smoking room door. In old hotels, bells seemed to breed on walls. This one was smaller than the manager's board, but the brass labels were the same style. "Do you know the bell system here?" he asked. Alastair blinked. "The bell system? Aye. Which pull rings to the pantry, which to the manager's office, which bell shows on which board. I have no idea. I ring when I want tea and hope civilization answers. Did Serena know it?" "I doubt she cared." Hamish rose. "Would you come with me?" Alastair looked alarmed. "Am I being arrested?" "No. I'm testing how foolish you are." "That is not reassuring." "It's no meant to be." They walked from the smoking room into the corridor and up the old stair. Alastair climbed slowly, one hand on the banister, his dignity less steady on steps than in chairs. At the landing, Hamish stopped. "Where did you stand?" "There." Alastair pointed to a place near a narrow window overlooking the service yard. "And the voices?" "Beyond the corner." "Near her door, I suppose." Hamish led him to the Bridal Suite corridor. The door was closed now, sealed by police tape, its brass plaque absurdly cheerful. Beside it, the crooked bell pull had been tied off. "If you wanted to summon the pantry from inside that room, which pull would you use?" Alastair stared. "The bell pull, surely." "There are 2 cords. One by the fireplace, one near the dressing alcove." "Are there?" "Ah, yeah. I did not inspect the ladies' bell pulls, Constable." Hamish almost smiled. "And if you wanted the manager's office to think the suite had rung, I would ask the manager. Or shout, 'I have no talent for machinery.'" That was true enough. Alastair looked at the old service fittings with the blank politeness of a man who believed servants, when not visible, were brought into being by architecture. They returned downstairs. In the lobby, Elspeth stood by the fireplace, pretending not to wait for him. Priscilla was at the desk with a stack of guest receipts, her face calm and tired. Johnson's office door remained shut. Alastair paused before going back into the smoking room. "Constable." "Aye? Do you think me ridiculous?" "Yes." The older man flinched. "But ridiculous is no the same as wicked." Alastair looked away. "She should not have died," he said. "No. I was angry with her." "Aye. I wanted her to be kind because I was lonely. Then I hated her for not being what I wanted." "That's a common enough sin. Common sins can still shame a man." Hamish watched him go back to his cold fireplace and untouched whiskey. Elspeth came over. "Well?" He loved too loudly and thought too little. "That sounds like guilt. It sounds like grief wearing borrowed clothes." He had motive. "Ah, yeah. He was near her room. Aye. And?" Hamish took out the folded note and showed her the broken wax. "No crescent mark." Elspeth frowned. "The sugar tongs again." The note in the Bridal Suite had the mark. This one doesna. "Meaning?" "Meaning not every red seal was handled the same way. The crescent belongs to the later note, the one someone needed to tamper with." Priscilla joined them, carrying a ledger list. "And Mr. Wren? He doesna know one bell pull from another. That may be true of half the guests." "Aye. Which is why the killer is likely in the other half." Priscilla understood first. "Staff. Or someone who moves like staff in this building." Her eyes went to Johnson's closed door. Elspeth followed the look. "You think Serena threatened to expose the deposits, and someone inside the hotel altered the timing after she died?" "I think someone wanted us to believe she was alive when Callum brought the tray, or that she rang for service after the argument. And the silver tongs, used to lift or reseal wax, snapped in the doing." Priscilla said quietly, "The antique service was kept in the drawing-room cabinet after tea. Mr. Johnson has the cabinet key." Hamish looked at her. "He keeps it because of the insurance," she added. From behind Johnson's office door came the faint sound of drawers opening and closing. Not hurriedly, carefully, Hamish slipped the unmarked note into an evidence envelope. The widower in the smoking room had been almost too perfect. Lonely, flattered, wounded, seen near the room, foolish enough to write a sealed note. Blair would like him nearly as much as he had liked Callum, but the crescent mark had not followed Alastair Wren. It remained where it had always pointed. Back to the tea table, the service bells, and the man with keys. Chapter 10. The bell that rang twice. The morning brought one of those Highland pauses in the weather which no sensible person trusted. Rain no longer fell. It merely waited in the gutters, in the grass, in the dark creases of the hills, and in the bones of everyone who had walked through it for 3 days. Tommel Castle stood above its wet lawns, looking cleaner from a distance, and more tired close up. Hamish arrived before breakfast. The front hall smelled of polish, damp wool, and toast being made for people who would not enjoy it. A maid crossed the tiles carrying a vase of roses whose heads had collapsed entirely. She held them with the tender disgust of someone removing a body from a party. Priscilla was at the reception desk with a stack of receipts. "You are early," she said. "I thought I'd come before Mr. Johnson had time to make the truth more presentable. He has been in his office since 6. Doing what? Opening drawers, closing drawers, asking for black coffee, not drinking it. That sounds busy." "It sounds frightened." Elspeth came down the stairs, notebook in hand, hair still damp from the mist outside. "I heard there was to be a viewing of the sacred ledger," she said. "You hear a great deal," said Priscilla. "I stand near doors. Journalism is mostly architecture." Hamish looked toward Johnson's office. "Before the ledger, I want the bells." "The bells?" said Elspeth. "Aye. They've been more honest than most folk here." Priscilla understood before Elspeth did. She glanced up at the old brass service board above the reception alcove, where little labelled windows waited like sleeping eyes. "There is the main board here," she said. "The office board inside. A smaller one in the pantry. Some rooms ring to more than one place. Old wiring." "Old wiring is like old gossip," said Hamish. "It goes where it likes, but it usually began somewhere. They found the night porter, Mr. Beattie, in a little room off the back passage, eating toast over a newspaper folded to the racing page. He was thin, grey, and permanently apologetic, as if he had once offended somebody important and never learned who. "I told Inspector Blair," he said at once. 11:20. I'd checked the clock." "Why did you check it?" asked Hamish. "Because the kitchen clock was slow, and Cook had been at me about it. Said if I logged the back doors wrong again, she'd pin my ears to the ham. Cook sounds useful." "She is." "And the Bridal Suite bell rang?" "Aye. The flag dropped here." He pointed to the small service board near the pantry door. "Bridal Suite. Did it ring loud?" "Clear enough." "Who answered it?" "Who answered it?" Mr. Beattie looked miserable. "That's the part I canna say. Tree. I was at the back door. I heard steps above. Thought one of the girls had gone up." "Which girl?" "Myrie, maybe. Or Jean. It was late. We'd had the reception, trays, folk wanting hot water, folk wanting pillows, folk wanting another pillow after ejecting the first pillow. You lose count of humanity in hotels." Hamish liked that answer, because it was too tired to be clever. "Did the bell ring again?" Mr. Beattie frowned. "Later? Aye." He scratched his cheek. "There was a faint tremble on the board. I thought it was the wiring. Happens in damp." "When?" "After midnight, maybe. I was closing the side door." "Which flag?" "I didn't see it properly. It flicked and dropped back." Priscilla, standing in the doorway, said, "The manager's office board sometimes catches a secondary ring when the main board does not." Mr. Beattie looked relieved. "Aye, miss. That's right." Hamish turned. "Show me." They went first to the pantry. Callum was there, stacking cups with the care of a man aware that every clink might be interpreted as guilt. Myrie stood by the sink, sleeves rolled, face pale when she saw Hamish. "No one is arresting anyone," he said. Callum said, "That is beginning to sound like a daily special." Hamish almost smiled. "I need you to watch the bellboard." The pantry board was plain, battered, and mounted above a row of hooks. Labels sat under small rectangular windows. Bridal Suite had a crack across the glass. Manager was stained where years of steam had reached it. Priscilla led Hamish upstairs to the bridal suite corridor. Elspeth followed, but stopped when Hamish looked back. "This is police work," he said. "It is also hotel history," said Elspeth. "It will still be history in 10 minutes." She leaned against the wall. "Fine. I shall stand here and not hear anything officially." Inside the bridal suite, the room had been stripped of its prettiness. The rose petals were gone. The tea tray had been removed. The cushions had been stacked on a chair. Without Serena, without candles, without the weekend's false glow, it was only a damp, grand room with good curtains and bad memories. Hamish stood by the fireplace and looked at the crooked bell pull. "There are 2 cords," said Priscilla. "This one by the fireplace is meant for service. The one by the dressing alcove used to call the manager's office directly. Brides wanted privacy, apparently, but not enough to do without attention. Romance is demanding. It is often very practical underneath." He pulled the fireplace cord. Below, faintly, a bell rang. After a moment, Callum shouted up the stair, "Pantry!" Hamish nodded. Then he crossed to the dressing alcove. The cord there was older, set partly behind a curtain, its tassel faded to the colour of weak tea. He pulled. A different sound travelled through the wall. Not louder, lower, a tremor rather than a ring. They went downstairs to Johnson's office. The manager was inside, standing by his desk with the booking ledger open before him. He closed it when they entered. "Constable," he said, "I thought we were to review the records. We will. I have cooperated fully." "That must be tiring." Johnson looked from Hamish to Priscilla. "Miss Halberton Smythe, perhaps you could continue with the guests." "I am helping Constable Macbeth with the hotel system. I hardly think old bells are relevant." "Then they should not trouble you," said Priscilla. On the wall behind Johnson's desk, half hidden by a framed certificate, was another board. Smaller, cleaner, and better maintained than the pantry board. Its brass labels were polished. "Bridal Suite Private" sat above a little window with a faded flag behind it. Hamish pointed. "That rang when I pulled the alcove cord." Johnson's face stayed polite. "Very likely. The bridal suite has a private service history. Who can reset this board?" "Any staff member, I suppose." "Any guest?" "No." "Callum?" "He would have no reason to enter my office." "That is not the question." Johnson's fingers touched the edge of the ledger. "Possibly, but he does not know the old system well." "Alastair Wren?" "Ah, certainly not." "Mary?" "She knows parts of it." "And you?" Johnson laughed softly. "I manage the hotel, Constable. I know where the bells ring." "Aye," said Hamish. "That's what worries me." They left him with his ledger and went back into the corridor. Elspeth was there, not writing. That was how Hamish knew she had been listening properly. "So?" she said. "2 bells. 1 clear bell to the pantry," said Hamish. 1 private bell to the manager's office. Priscilla looked troubled. "The first, at 11:20, was the pantry bell?" "That's what Beatty saw. And the later faint ring could have been the private line. Or someone resetting the manager's board. Or damp wiring, if you believe damp has a sense of timing." Elspeth said, "What does that prove?" "Not enough. That is not a journalist's favourite answer. It is a policeman's safest." Hamish walked to the old service stair. It was narrow, twisting down behind the main rooms, built for staff to move unseen. The walls were marked where trays had scraped the plaster for generations. At the bottom was a side door to the yard, and beside it, the passage to Johnson's office. He stood halfway down and imagined the movement. Serena in the bridal suite. A meeting, perhaps after the reception. An argument. The first bell at 11:20, drawing someone up or proving someone was there. A note on a tray. Red wax. A time that needed changing. Then later, after death had made every honest object dangerous, someone took the room service note, lifted the seal. altered or removed what mattered. Pressed the wax back down with the antique sugar tongs, because fingers would smear it and a knife might tear the paper. The bent claw left a crescent. The hinge snapped. The broken piece went out by the service stair. Hamish looked at Priscilla. "Where was the antique tea service after afternoon tea?" "In the drawing-room cabinet." "Locked?" "Yes." "Key?" "Mr. Johnson." "Any duplicate?" "There may be one in the office safe." "And who knows that?" She did not answer. Below them, Johnson's office door opened and closed. A moment later, Mr. Johnson appeared at the foot of the stair. "Constable," he said, looking up, "if you are quite finished touring the servants' passages, I am ready with the ledger." "Servants' passages are useful," said Hamish. "They show how things really move." Johnson's smile was small. "In my experience, they mostly show dust." Hamish came down the stairs slowly. "Then we'll look at your books and see whether dust has been making deposits." For the first time, Johnson did not smile quickly enough. In the office, the booking ledger lay open. Names, dates, packages, deposits, receipts, neat columns. Too neat, perhaps. Hamish did not trust numbers that looked anxious to please. Elspeth was not allowed in, which annoyed her enough to make her wait directly outside the door. Priscilla stayed because Johnson could hardly object to the owner's daughter knowing how badly the weekend had been managed. Hamish turned pages. At first, the entries looked ordinary. Then they became less so. A December wedding deposit marked received, then a second line marked admin correction, a June booking moved into a holding account, a cancellation fee noted where no cancellation had occurred, initials in the margin. Metriod. "Administrative confusion," said Johnson. "Aye," said Hamish. "There's a lot of it. Must be catching." Johnson's voice sharpened. "The hotel has been under pressure. Cash flow in hospitality is complex. Guests do not understand how deposits are staged against suppliers. Do dead wedding columnists understand?" The room went still. Priscilla looked at Hamish, then at Johnson. Johnson closed the ledger with one flat hand. "Miss Lyle misunderstood. She had a talent for making malice out of fragments. She was going to speak to the owner. She said many things." "And you met her in her room?" "No." "After 11? "No." "Did she ring for you?" "No." "Did you go up the service stair?" Johnson's eyes flicked, not to Hamish, but to Priscilla. "It was the smallest mistake," he recovered. "I was in this office. Can anyone say so?" "The hotel was busy." "Aye. Hotels are very good at giving folk nowhere to be seen." Johnson stood. "Constable, I've indulged this long enough. A woman has been murdered, and you are harassing the one man trying to keep order." Hamish's voice stayed gentle. "Order is not the same as truth. I know my duty to this hotel. That may be the problem." Johnson opened the office door. Elspeth, who had plainly been standing too close, stepped back with unconvincing innocence. Hamish left without another word. In the corridor, Priscilla walked beside him. "You think he did it?" "I think the bells know he lied." "And the ledger?" "The ledger knows why." Elspeth caught up. "That sounded almost quotable. It wasna meant to be. Then I shall improve it." Hamish stopped near the lobby, where guests sat in clumps over tea, receipts, and wounded expectations. Myrie stood by the service door, watching Johnson's office with fear so plain it had lost all disguise. Hamish looked from her to the stair, from the stair to the drawing-room cabinet where the old silver had been kept, and from there to the office door that had just closed. The case had not yet come together, but it had narrowed. Not to romance, not to jealousy, not to a foolish waiter or a lonely widower. To bells, wax, money, and a man who knew how to make an old hotel speak at the wrong time. Chapter 11. Tea in the drawing-room. Hamish chose the drawing-room because lies behaved differently in good chairs. In offices, people defended themselves with papers. In corridors, they escaped into movement. But in a drawing-room, among teacups and witnesses and wilting roses, people remembered they were being seen. That could make them careful. It could also make them careless in more useful ways. By 4 o'clock, the remaining guests had been gathered under the official heading of a refund and reassurance meeting. No one felt reassured. The roses near the fire had finally given up. Their petals had loosened and dropped onto the side table, where they lay like small red scraps of failed theatre. The antique tea service had been returned to display, minus the sugar tongs, though Johnson had placed it on the central table as if polished silver might argue in his favour. Tea was poured because panic looked worse without cups. Priscilla stood near the mantelpiece. She had been helping the guests make lists of deposits, dates, and promises. Her calm had become more valuable than the hotel's furniture. Elspeth sat to one side with her notebook closed, which made Hamish more nervous than if it had been open. Callum Firth stood near the service door, stiff with resentment and fear. Mary was beside him, twisting a napkin between her hands. Alastair Wren had taken a chair near the window and looked 10 years older than when the weekend began. Marcus Johnson entered last. He wore his best dark suit and had shaved again, though not well. A small cut near his jaw had been covered with powder. He smiled at the room as if he were about to announce favourable weather. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "first, may I say how deeply Tommel Castle regrets." The front door slammed somewhere in the hall. Blair arrived with the timing of a bad cough. "Right," he said, striding into the room. "Enough of this tea nonsense. Where's the waiter?" Callum went white. Hamish did not turn round. "Sit down, Blair." Blair stopped. "What did you say?" "I said sit down. There's a chair behind you, unless it's fled." A faint sound moved through the room. It was not laughter. It was the ghost of it. Blair's face reddened. "I've had enough of your games, Macbeth. Firth had access, motive, and opportunity. I'll take him in again, and this time—" "No," said Hamish. The word was soft, but it had weight. Blair stared at him. The room, sensing something in Hamish's voice, became entirely still. Hamish looked at Callum. "The lad is vain, foolish about women, and too fond of being looked at. That makes him young. It does not make him a murderer." Callum blinked, unsure whether to be grateful or insulted. Blair jabbed a finger toward him. "He carried the tray, with brass tongs from the pantry." "So?" So the wax seal on the room service note was marked by the bent claw of the antique silver sugar tongs. Hamish placed a glass jar on the tea table. Inside lay the broken silver arm. There was a small movement from Johnson. Not much. A tightening at the shoulders, a breath taken too soon. But Priscilla saw it. So did Elspeth. Hamish unscrewed the jar, and using a clean handkerchief, tipped the broken piece onto a folded white napkin. "The claw is bent," he said. "You'll remember Miss Lyle laughing about it at tea. It left a wee crescent mark in the icing of a petit four." Lady Gilchrist leaned forward. "I remember that. She said the thing had been in the wars." "Aye." Later, the same crescent appeared on the red wax of the room service note in the Bridal Suite. Johnson gave a thin smile. "A curious coincidence, Constable. Old objects leave marks. They do, especially when they are used where they shouldna be." Hamish turned to the table and lifted a sealed card he had prepared. He pressed the bent claw gently into a dab of red sealing wax that Cook had provided after calling the entire police force a nuisance. The mark it left was small and crescent-shaped. Several guests murmured. Blair frowned, unwillingly interested despite himself. Hamish continued. "Callum took the morning tea tray upstairs with brass tongs. Myrie put them there. Cook sealed the note below. The seal was dry before it left the pantry, so the crescent mark could only have been made after the tray went upstairs." Johnson's voice was smooth. "By Callum, perhaps. Not unless he had the antique silver tongs in his pocket, but those were locked in the drawing-room cabinet after tea." Johnson spread his hands. "Keys are not magic. Staff can be careless." "Aye," said Hamish. "But you had the key." The room stirred. Johnson gave a little laugh. "As manager, I hold many keys, and many worries. That is not a crime. No. But taking duplicate wedding deposits is, A bride at the back made a small sound. Her fiancé reached for her hand. Johnson's face hardened. "You are making a serious accusation." "I'm reading your ledger." Hamish took a folded sheet from his pocket and laid it beside the broken tong. "This is the page missing from Serena Lyle's notebook." Johnson stared. Priscilla looked quickly at Hamish. He had not told her that. "It was not found in your office," Hamish said. "You were too careful for that. It was found where careful men often make mistakes, in a place they think is beneath notice." Blair barked. "Where?" "In the ash bucket by the service yard. Half burned. Enough left." That was not the whole truth. The page had been recovered by McNab after Hamish asked him to check the yard bins and stove ash. It had taken patience, a sieve, and more politeness to cook than Blair had shown anyone in 10 years. Hamish unfolded the protected fragment. Serena wrote, "Deposits transferred twice. Initials M.J. Then below it, 3 booking names. Mrs. Douglas, the Macrae wedding, the Edinburgh couple." The Dundee mother rose halfway out of her chair. "Our money?" Priscilla held up a hand. "Please, we will account for every deposit." Johnson's eyes moved round the room. "This is a misunderstanding of cash flow." "No," said Hamish. "It is taking money from one promise to pay for another, and calling the gap tomorrow's problem. I kept this hotel open." His voice had sharpened. Now the polish was cracking. "I kept staff employed. I kept suppliers paid when the owners would not spend what needed spending. I brought Miss Lyle here to save the place." "You brought her here to make Tommel Castle fashionable," said Hamish. "She discovered it was floating on other people's deposits." Johnson turned to the guests. "No one would have lost anything. One successful season, and every account would have been settled. That is what every thief says when he still hopes for luck." The words fell quietly. Johnson's mouth tightened. Hamish picked up the broken tong again. "Miss Lyle meant to expose you. She told me she would speak to the owner in the morning, but she also spoke to you that night." "No." "She rang the private bell from the Bridal Suite." "No." "The first bell at 11:20 went to the pantry. That drew attention upward. Later, there was a faint second ring on the manager's office board. The old private line. You knew how the system worked because you used it every day." Johnson looked toward Priscilla. "This is fantasy." Priscilla's face was pale, but her voice was steady. "The private bell still rings to your office. We tested it." Johnson's anger flickered. "You had no right." "A woman died in my family's hotel," she said. "Rights are not what concern me most," Hamish went on. "You went up by the service stair. You and Serena argued. Maybe she threatened you. Maybe you begged for time. Maybe you told yourself everything would be repaid if she only kept quiet until Monday." Johnson said nothing. "After she was dead, you staged the room. Crushed petals. A romantic quarrel. A tray. A sealed note. Enough little signs for Blair to choose Callum or Mr. Wren, depending on which shame looked more useful." Blair bristled. "Now, see here." "Sit," said Hamish, without looking at him. Blair sat. It surprised him more than anyone. Hamish turned back to Johnson. "But the note was wrong. It showed the wrong time, or the wrong hand, or something Serena had written on it before you understood its value. So you lifted the seal. You used the antique sugar tongs because the claw was fine enough to get under the wax. The bent claw left the crescent. The hinge snapped. You threw the broken arm into the service yard with a linen thread caught in it." He looked toward the window. "Sonsie found it," Lady Gilchrist whispered. "The cat?" "Aye. A better detective than some, and cheaper." A nervous ripple of laughter passed through the room and died quickly. Johnson's face had gone still now. Too still. Hamish laid out the pieces, one by one. The crescent in the icing proves the bent claw's shape. The wax mark proves the silver tongs touched the Bridal Suite note after the tray left the pantry. The broken hinge proves the tongs were damaged during that handling, not stolen for value. The private bell proved the timing could be manipulated by someone who knew the old service system. The ledger and Serena's page proved motive, and Myrie saw a man in a dark coat coming down the service stair after the second bell. Myrie made a small sound. Johnson turned toward her slowly. "You saw nothing," he said. It was not loud. That made it worse. Myrie's face crumpled, but she stood her ground. "I saw your coat." Johnson's eyes narrowed. Callum stepped half in front of her. It was a small movement, brave because it was awkward. "You told me," Myrie whispered. "You told me if folk talked, there'd be no wages, no wedding refunds, no jobs." Johnson's voice shook now. "Because panic would have ruined everyone." "No," said Hamish. "You did that yourself." For a moment nobody moved. Then Johnson laughed once. It was a dry, broken sound, utterly unlike his hotel laugh. "You think you understand. You come in with your village boots and your clever little marks. Do you know what it costs to keep this place standing? The heating alone could ruin a man. Suppliers want money before guests arrive. Guests want perfection before paying the balance. Owners want charm without bills. Staff want wages. Brides want dreams." "Dreams are dear," said Hamish. "That doesn't make them yours to sell twice." Johnson gripped the back of a chair. "She was going to destroy us." "No," said Priscilla softly. "She was going to expose you." He looked at her then, and something in him sagged. The fight did not leave him all at once. It drained out through his face. He became smaller in his good suit, an ordinary man in a room full of tea and receipts and ruined hope. Blair stood, recovering himself. "Marcus Johnson," he said loudly, "I am arresting you." "Macnab is outside," said Hamish. "He'll do it properly." Blair turned purple. "I am the senior officer here." "Aye. Then look senior, and let the trained man finish the sentence." Macnab entered from the hall, solemn and composed. He cautioned Johnson in a voice that did not need to shout because it understood its own authority. Johnson did not resist. As he was led out, the guests watched him with the particular silence reserved for respectable people whose respectability has failed in public. The tea cooled. The silver shone. The roses dropped another petal. And Tommel Castle, which had spent the weekend selling romance, sat exposed among its own promises. Chapter 12. The Manager's Last Performance. Marcus Johnson did not collapse. That would have been easier for everyone. A collapsed man could be pitied, carried out, and spoken of afterward in softened terms. Johnson remained upright. Even as Macnab held his arm, even as Blair puffed beside him, he kept the posture of a hotel manager escorting an awkward guest away from a public room. "I should like my solicitor," he said. "You'll have that," said Macnab. "And I should like it noted that I have made no confession." "That'll be noted too." Johnson looked past him to the guests. "I did what I did for Tommel Castle." No one answered. The line should have sounded noble. In the drawing-room, with receipts on laps and cooling tea on side tables, it sounded like a man trying to charge rent for his own panic. Priscilla stood very still by the mantelpiece. Her face gave little away, but Hamish saw the strain in her hands. She had spent years watching Tommel Castle pretend to be better ordered than it was. Now the pretending had turned criminal, in front of guests who had come to buy candlelight and photographs. Johnson saw her looking. "Miss Halberton Smythe," he said, and his voice changed. It became smoother, almost pleading. "You know what this place costs. You know what the owners refuse to face. I held it together." Priscilla's reply was quiet. "You used other people's money. I borrowed from future income. You lied to brides, to keep staff employed." Cook, who had come to the drawing-room door and was wiping her hands on her apron, said, "You might have asked whether we wanted wages paid that way." Johnson flinched as if she had struck him. "I protected this hotel," he said. Hamish looked around the room. The Edinburgh bride was crying silently now, not prettily, not dramatically, simply from exhaustion. Her fiancé sat beside her with one hand on her folder, as though paperwork might keep the floor steady. Alastair Wren stared at the carpet. Callum and Myrie stood close together by the service door, two young people who had discovered that innocence did not protect one from being useful to other people's lies. "You protected the name," said Hamish. "Not the people." Johnson turned on him then. "You know nothing about running a place like this. Nothing. You wander about in your old uniform, making jokes, letting villagers think laziness is wisdom. Do you know what happens when a hotel fails? Staff dismissed. Suppliers unpaid. Weddings cancelled. Families ruined. But no, you find a mark in wax and call it truth." "Aye," said Hamish. "Because it was." Johnson's mouth twisted. "She would have destroyed us. Miss Lyle, she enjoyed it. Don't let them make a saint of her. She came here smiling and poking and flirting and writing people down like entries in a ledger. She made men fools and women nervous. She would have written one column and finished us." Hamish's voice remained soft. "She may have been vain. She may have been cruel. She may have enjoyed knowing where folk were weak. But she had found theft. A temporary imbalance. No, theft." Johnson shook his head, breathing harder now. "One successful season. That was all I needed. Miss Lyle's endorsement would have brought bookings. The spring weddings would have cleared the winter losses. Everyone would have been repaid. And Serena?" She would not listen. The room seemed to lean toward the sentence. Johnson heard himself then. His eyes moved, searching for a way back. But the words had already gone out. McNabb's grip on his arm tightened slightly. Hamish said, "Tell it straight now." Johnson laughed under his breath. "Straight? There is no straight in a hotel account book." "There is in a death." For a moment Johnson looked almost relieved to stop performing. "She rang for me," he said. "The private bell. I went up because I thought she meant to bargain. People like that always bargain. I thought she wanted money, or favour, or a better suite, or some promise of future business. And instead, she had copied figures, names, deposits. She had spoken to staff. She knew enough to make it ugly. Ugly for you. For everyone." "No," said Priscilla. "You keep saying everyone when you mean yourself." Johnson turned to her with a wounded expression, as if she had broken some pact of class and furniture polish. "I asked her for time," he said. She laughed. "She said hope was not an accounting method." Elspeth, who had been silent, looked down at her notebook and did not write. Johnson swallowed. "I took her wrist. Only that." She pulled away. There was the bell cord, the little table, the tea tray from earlier. She struck her head. Hamish did not soften. "And after?" Johnson closed his eyes briefly. "After, I was frightened. I thought if they found her then, in that state, after asking for me, the hotel was finished. Everything was finished. Callum had been seen around her. Wren had made a fool of himself. There were already stories. So you gave the stories furniture." Johnson opened his eyes. "I moved petals. I left the note. I thought the morning tray would confuse the time. Then I saw the seal. She had written something on the back of the card. A time. My name, perhaps. I don't remember." "You remember." His face hardened again. "I removed it, with the sugar tongs. They were fine enough. I had taken them from the cabinet. I thought I could lift the wax without tearing the paper, but the claw caught." He looked at the broken silver on the napkin. "Yes, and you threw the broken half away. In the yard. Wrapped in linen? I wiped it. There was wax on it." Cook gave a bitter snort. "With my good breakfast cloths, no doubt. It was an absurd complaint in the circumstances, but it was human, and because it was human, several people looked away." Blair seized his moment. "So you admit it," he said loudly. "You admit murder." Johnson's face shut again. "I admit an accident and panic." Blair stepped forward. "You'll admit what I tell you to admit." Hamish turned his head slowly. "No, he willna." Blair stared. "What?" "He'll say what happened, not what suits your report. You defending him now?" "I'm defending the truth from your appetite." The room went quiet again. Blair's jaw worked. You insubordinate. Later, said McNab, in a voice so professionally flat that even Blair paused. Johnson looked suddenly tired. The performance had carried him as far as it could. Without it, he was only a middle-aged man with powder on a shaving cut and ruin in his pocket. Myrie stepped forward. "I saw you," she said. Johnson did not look at her. "I saw you come down the service stair after the second bell. You had your dark coat over your arm. I thought it was because of the rain, but your sleeve was torn." Hamish looked at her. "You're sure?" "Aye." Her voice shook, but the answer did not. Johnson whispered, "You said nothing." "You frightened me. I never threatened you. You did it politely," she said. "That is still threatening." Callum's face changed with admiration. He had perhaps never heard Myrie speak so plainly in a room full of guests. Priscilla crossed to the table and picked up the ledger list. "Every deposit will be traced," she said. "Every couple will be contacted. The owners will be told today." Johnson gave a sad little smile. "They will blame me for everything." "You gave them enough to begin with." The words were not cruel. That made them worse. McNab led Johnson toward the door. At the threshold, Johnson paused and looked back at the drawing-room. The silver, the roses, the guests, the old portraits, the tea cooling in porcelain cups. For a heartbeat, his face held genuine grief. Not for Serena, Hamish thought. For the room as he had wanted it to be. Then Blair followed him out, already telling McNab what he himself had suspected all along. No one in the drawing-room believed him, but no one had the strength to argue. After the door closed, the room remained still. Then Cook said, "Tea's stewed." It was such an ordinary sentence that the Edinburgh bride began to laugh and cry at the same time. Her fiancé put his arm around her with more certainty than he had shown all weekend. Priscilla sat down at last. Elspeth closed her notebook. Hamish looked at the broken sugar tongs lying on the white napkin. They had been made for ceremony, for sweetness, for the small, graceful habits of people who wish life to look civilized. One bent claw had done what all the polished speeches had not. It had told the truth. Chapter 13. No prize for romance. By morning, the rain had finally stopped. Tommel Castle stood above the wet lawns under a thin wash of pale light, looking less like a romantic destination than a place that had survived an argument with itself. The hills beyond were still half hidden, but the mist had lifted from the drive. Puddles held pieces of sky. The roses in the tubs by the entrance had collapsed beyond rescue. Inside, the ballroom was being stripped. The birch arch came down first. 2 kitchen boys carried it out through the side door, trailing ribbon behind them like evidence of a party that had lost its nerve. The white cloths were lifted from the tables. Candle stubs were gathered in a tin. Someone had stacked the printed romance programs beside the fireplace, where they curled slightly in the damp heat. Hamish watched from the doorway. A hotel after a failed event had a special sadness. Not tragic, exactly. More like a theatre after a bad play, when the scenery suddenly looked wooden and the costumes too bright. Callum Firth came in carrying a crate of unused favours. He saw Hamish and stopped. "If you've come to tell me I'm cleared," he said, "I know." "Are ye?" "Everyone keeps looking at me as if I've been rescued from a burning house. I'd rather they stopped. That'll take a day or 2. I didn't need rescuing." "No?" Callum's pride tried to stand up. His face, tired and young, gave him away. After a moment he said, "Maybe a little." Hamish nodded toward the crate. "What are those?" "Silver paper hearts." "Not real silver. Obviously. Mr. Johnson would have insured them if they were." The joke surprised both of them. Callum gave a short laugh, then looked ashamed of it. "You'll be all right," said Hamish. "I'm leaving." "Where to?" "Inverness, maybe. A restaurant. Somewhere people don't know my business before I do." "That sounds like most places until you arrive." Callum looked toward the service door, where Myrie was speaking to Cook. "Myrie says I'll come back within a month." "Will you?" "Probably." He lifted the crate. "But I'd like to leave first. It makes coming back look like a decision." Hamish let him go. In the lobby, Priscilla sat at a table with receipts spread before her. She had removed her gloves and was writing names in a careful hand. Beside her, the Edinburgh bride and the Dundee mother watched every line. Neither looked happy, but both looked steadier. The Macrae deposit will be protected, Priscilla was saying. The owners have agreed to cover that one first, because the family paid twice. The rest will be audited, the Dundee mother said. Owners agree quickly when scandal is holding a notebook. Elspeth, seated nearby, looked up. I shall try to appear flattered. Priscilla did not smile, but something near a smile passed behind her tiredness. Hamish waited until the bride and her mother moved away before approaching. You've had a busy morning, he said. So have you. I mostly stood in doorways. That is your more convincing form of work. Elspeth closed her notebook. I've written the piece. Hamish sighed. How bad? Sharper than you would like. That covers most of your writing. But kinder to the staff than they expect, she said. Johnson will not be allowed to hide behind them. Priscilla looked at her then. Thank you, Elspeth shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. It is still a story. Yes, said Priscilla, but not a cruel one. For a moment, the three of them sat in the ruins of the romance weekend without speaking. Hamish felt the old tug between the two women, though tug was not quite the word. Priscilla belonged to a world of old furniture, social obligation, and restraint. Elspeth belonged to ink, questions, and doors left ajar. Both saw too much. Both expected more honesty from him than he found convenient. Priscilla broke the silence first. You were right about protecting things before deciding whether they deserve it. Hamish looked at her. I wasna kind when I said it. No. But you were right. Elspeth tapped her pencil against the notebook. This is becoming dangerously mature. Shall I fetch Blair? As if summoned by the threat of seriousness, Blair entered from the hall. He was in a fine mood, which meant everyone else was in some danger. Macbeth, he announced. I've spoken to Strathbane. Clean case. Fraud motive. Staged scene. Waiter eliminated early by my pressure. Your pressure nearly made him confess to existing, said Hamish. Blair ignored that. And I've told them about the forensic catering. Priscilla blinked. The what? The catering evidence. Tongs, wax, jam, that sort of thing. Elspeth wrote something down. Blair pointed at her. That's off the record. Too late, said Elspeth. Blair scowled and turned back to Hamish. The superintendent is pleased. Then there's been a misunderstanding. He says local knowledge helped. That'll have hurt him. Blair lowered his voice. Don't get above yourself. I knew Johnson was slippery from the start. You thought Callum did it. I was testing him. And Mr. Wren. Testing him too. You have a generous method. Blair's face darkened. But before he could reply, Luggs pushed through the half-open kitchen door with a piece of bacon in his mouth and the solemn haste of a thief who felt misunderstood. Cook's voice came after him. That dog! Luggs passed Blair without guilt and disappeared beneath the lobby table. Hamish looked at Cook. I'll pay for it. You will not, she said. He has the first honest appetite this hotel has seen all weekend. That did more for the lobby than any official reassurance. The Edinburgh bride laughed properly. The Dundee mother smiled despite herself. Even Priscilla turned her face away, though not before Hamish saw amusement. Sonsie appeared outside the French windows shortly after, walking along the terrace wall with the calm superiority of a creature who had contributed to justice and required no certificate. He paused, looked in at the humans sorting money, grief, and blame, then vanished into the damp garden. The antique tea service was removed from the drawing-room before noon. A man from Inverness came with a padded case and a clipboard. He counted each piece twice. The teapot, the creamer, the sugar bowl, the tray. When he reached the sugar tongs, Hamish handed over the evidence record instead of the object. One broken pair, the man said. One very useful pair. Insured? Ah, yeah. Repairable? Hamish thought of Serena Lyle in her green silk, of Johnson's polished lies, of Callum's frightened shame, of Mary standing straight at last. "No," he said. "I'd say they've done their work." By afternoon, guests began leaving, not in the cheerful disorder planned for the end of a romantic weekend, but slowly, with envelopes, apologies, and promises that would have to be kept by people who had not made them. Alastair Wren came down last, carrying his own bag. He stopped beside Hamish. "I shall not be returning to Tommel Castle," he said. "That may be wise." Alastair looked toward the stripped ballroom. "I behaved foolishly." "Aye. You do not soften much, do you? Not when folk already know the truth." The older man smiled faintly. "Miss Lyle was not kind, but she was alive. That should matter more than my embarrassment." "It does?" Alastair nodded and went out into the pale light. Elspeth left soon after, raincoat over one arm, notebook in her bag. "You'll read it and complain," she said. "Likely. You'll complain less than usual. I wouldn't depend on that." She studied him for a second. "You did well, Hamish." He shifted. "The cat helped." "Yes," she said. "That will be my headline." When she was gone, Priscilla joined him at the front steps. The air smelled of wet grass and old stone. Below the hotel, Lochdew lay quiet around the harbour, as if it had been waiting for the weekend's fever to break. "Do you think the hotel will survive?" Hamish asked. "Buildings survive all sorts of disgrace. Reputations are more selective." "And you?" She looked at him. "I did not kill anyone, if that is your question." "It wasna. I know." Her voice softened. "I shall survive too." They stood together a moment longer. There were things Hamish might have said. There were things he would have said if he had been another sort of man, in another sort of life, with less rain and fewer unsolved feelings. Instead, he put his hands in his pockets and looked at the drive. "Mind you get some sleep," he said. Priscilla smiled. "There speaks romance." "Aye, I'm famous for it." She went back inside. Hamish walked down toward his Land Rover. Luggs was already waiting beside it, licking his chops and pretending innocence had a flavour of bacon. From the terrace wall came a soft movement, but when Hamish turned, Sonsie was gone. Behind him, Tommel Castle still stood. It would take more than one morning to clear the accounts, mend the staff, repay the couples, and strip the candlelight from the lies. But the first roses had been carried out, the first receipts had been opened. Someone in the kitchen laughed without lowering her voice. That was not restoration. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Tommel Castle still stood above the wet lawns, but its romance weekend ended with fewer flowers and more receipts. The staff learned, painfully, that saving a place by lying for it only makes the walls feel colder. Guests who had come for candlelight left with paperwork, and yet some left with more truth than they had been offered at the start. The silver sugar tongs were made for sweetness and ceremony. Their bent claw should have been no more than a small flaw in an old tea service. Instead, it left a crescent mark in wax, and proved that even delicate things can expose a rough hand when truth has been handled badly. Romance is charming when it is honest. It becomes cruel when it is sold as a cure for debt, loneliness, or pride. A lie dressed in candlelight is still a lie, though it may photograph beautifully. By evening, the kettle boiled, the last roses were carried out, and someone in the kitchen finally laughed without checking who might hear. Luggs slept after his bacon as if justice had been arranged for his comfort, while Sonsie disappeared into the damp garden with the only dignity left in the hotel. Have you ever seen someone try so hard to make a place look perfect that they forgot to make it honest? Thank you for visiting Tommel Castle with us tonight. If this mystery kept you company, leave a quiet light in the window for the next journey back to Lochdew. And when the village blames the jealous suitor, Hamish follows a crescent mark from the tea table to a carefully staged lie.